Laser stands for Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous. It's a series that I started in 2008. The lasers are an interdisciplinary program, and we have had previous presentations and discussions on great poets, not only scientists, engineers, historians, and so on, also poets, such as T.S. Eliot, Octavio Paz, Rainer Maria Rilke. Go to lasertalks.com and you can check out the videos of those discussions. Personally, I think that in the age of the machine, poetry is more relevant than ever. And poets, philosophers like Paul Valéry are particularly significant. I greatly admire three long poems written by Valéry. The English titles are The Young Fate, The Graveyard by the Sea, and The Sketch of a Serpent. Of course, there's much more in Valéry's poetry. Valéry also had a fascination with Leonardo da Vinci that led him to write countless notebooks full of diagrams, formulas, and drawings. Not what you normally expect from a poet. He also wrote an anti-novel, Monsieur Test, and the open letters collected in The Crisis of the Mind, published after the end of World War I, the tragic bloodbath of World War I. Today we host Professor Paul Gifford, who joins us live from Great Britain to discuss Paul Valéry. My introductions are notoriously brief, so I will not spend a lot of time discussing Professor Gifford's career that would take probably would take the whole hour. Numerous achievements. Is written quite a lot in about French literature. He's professor emeritus at St Andrews, University of St Andrews in Scotland, and he is the author of critical studies on Paul Valéry, and in particular, the book that you see in the next slide, the one Reading Paul Valéry, which is the book that really made me familiar with Professor Gifford's work. I will not talk about the speakers of tonight because it will happen tonight. Just if you are local, I see you at 7 p.m. at Stanford. Okay, that's said. Paul, okay, the podium is yours.
Thank you. Thank you,
When you want me to change slide, just say Piero, next slide.
I will. Okay. Well, hello, California. Good to be back with you at Stanford. I was invited scholar there in 2007 at the invitation of René Girard and did a conference with him in 2012. Good to be back. Well, my title tonight, Paul Valéry and Poetry. T.S. Eliot hailed Paul Valéry as the representative poet of the first half of the 20th century. A recent French biography, all 1,200 pages of it, the French do love the erudite doorstopper, broadens that description. The most distinguished thinker poet, the most versatile and best connected mind of his time, le contemporain capital, somebody whose thinking existence from 1871 to 1945 forms the most searching prism held up to a world-changing epoch of European history, science, and culture. By the 1920s and 30s, Paul Valéry knew personally everyone there was to know in French and European literature of that time. Might have expected that, but he also had Albert Einstein as trusted interlocutor and colleague, He discussed atoms with Niels Bohr and the crisis of representation in physics with the likes of Paul Langevin and Émile Borel. He also compared notes with Ravel and Stravinsky, Degas and Picasso. He collaborated with Bergson and Sir James Fraser, interacted with both Pétain and de Gaulle, having interviewed Mussolini and crossed paths with an entire gallery of Europe's interwar power brokers. You can begin to see how this capital contemporary of yesteryear reflects your own interdisciplinary breadth of reference. Indeed, Leonardo da Vinci was one of his founding inspirations. But now here's our problem for tonight. This representative and iconic status, confirmed as such by the national funeral decreed by de Gaulle in 1945, is something of a paradox. Valéry's reputation as a poet rests almost entirely on La Jeune Parc and Charme, two works published respectively in 1917 and 1922. He's by no means prolific or popular or even widely read in his own country, whereas Victor Hugo, his romantic predecessor, was number one in all those predictable generators of iconicity and national funerals. More puzzling still, he entirely sidesteps the shock of the new associated with the experimental ideas and practices of surrealism and cubism. Technically, he perfects traditional poetic forms, the ones modernists sometimes slightingly call neoclassical. And then this rarely practicing poet, this defender of a traditional art and craft of poetry, is reputedly the most obscure and difficult to read in the French language, possibly more so than his own preferred master and model, high priest of French symbolism, Stéphane Mallarmé. Now, how does a poet with that sort of profile come to be seen as one of the very greatest poets of all time and one of the most indispensable friends and champions of poetry? Well, there's a general answer to that question, and there's a specific and more personal one, proper to his own evolution. Let's hear each answer. General answer. The poet of La Jeune Parc and Charme accomplishes supremely well what all poetry aspires to do. He enchants with a verbal music that sings memorably. He articulates aspects and levels of experience that would otherwise remain inarticulate and unknown. He illuminates the founding conditions and the most central dilemmas of our loves and our lives. And doing all this, he reactivates our sense of human possibility as shaped by the ordering power of poetic speech, or more exactly, song. And then Valéry's poetry adds a further dimension, which is distinctive. It reflects lucidly on the origin, nature, and action of poetry. Perhaps we'd better say, Leonardo-like, on human creativity as such. He's equally interested, you see, in all the arts, particularly in the two great arts in which form most clearly predominates. That is music and architecture. This poetry, his poetry, renders account of itself. His rare self-awareness as a creative artist means that he is constantly offering us clear-sighted, no-nonsense elucidations of what is going on when poetry is created and enjoyed. This brings him close to those, and they are many, who are uncertain about what poetry is and whether it has any relevance for them. What does poetic song answer to? What is it that makes us sing? Valéry carried that typically radical question with him all his life, providing progressively deepening answers. Let's pick up this developmental thread in his late adolescence. I'm going to quote from a prose poem he wrote in the style of Baudelaire. The melancholy young narrator, in the grip of a foreboding sense of parties over, enters into an hallucinatory, dreamlike scenario. He's bystander at what seems to be a public funeral, and he's intuiting, as you do in dreams, an event of the gravest consequence, which, weirdly enough, seems to contradict the vulgar jubilation of the crowds. Quote, I stopped a passerby. Who is being confided to the earth? God, he replied, and he too ran off to join the rejoicing at the head of the convoy. And then what? Well, then we have the noise of the earth falling onto the coffin, at which signal the entire cosmos tips apocalyptically into night. The diamonds of the firmament, those bright stars of all our night skies, come unstuck. They melt into icy drops, falling down from heaven into the nocturnal soul of the consternated beholder. And I saw the tears of heaven flow. A great cry is heard, tearing the universe asunder. No doubt, quare me dereliquisti, why hast thou forsaken me? A wind of mortality and night extinguishes the flame of being and the desire to be. From now on, we simply and barely exist. That prose poem was written, believe it or not, by a 17-year-old schoolboy. I discovered it in the Department of Author Manuscripts at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. By the way, I haven't aired it in any English version before tonight. There's a lot we could say about it. Is it a case of the pathetic fallacy? That's to say, the notion that the natural world sympathizes with the consternation and tragic pain of the human subject? Is it, on the contrary, a perception that Nietzsche's famous Death of God, it has something of a confidence trick about it, an event in culture and not precisely an event in nature? Could we somehow even reconcile those two readings? And do you see anything like that, quite like that, in American literature? At all events, you won't be surprised to hear that Mallarmé, to whom the adolescent Valéry dedicated that prose poem in 1888, considered he had met the poet who would one day surpass him. And it is a fact that this image cluster of night wind, cosmic solitude, tears of the unsayable, describes very precisely the point of awakening of the mysterious self who speaks in La Jeune Parc. This shock of awakening, this distress and trauma, unrecognized as such at the time, are what was to throw the budding poet into a very radical decision. For the next 20 years, from 1894 up to 1912, he turned his back on poetry and devoted himself instead to observing the workings of his own mind, taken as a finite and functional closed system. As a man breathes, moves, digests, so must he feel, know, and think. So reckons Valéry, articulating with Promethean simplicity the hypothesis underlying what he calls his inner science, or his system for thinking, not a sum of thoughts made. That project engages an ethic, a mystique even, of mental training. How does one master the whole of the intrinsic potential of the human mind? By learning and deploying in all lucidity the mechanisms which these activities involve, but which largely escape the author who gives his name to the end product. It is the power to make the work which excites, torments, and fascinates me, he says. I don't admire chance, but what multiplies our chances? Being a poet? No, making oneself capable of being one. I think we need the second screen, Pierre. By the way, that's a quotation from Monsieur Test, the mythical hero.
Is this the right slide you want?
Yes, that should be good. Closed and functional system, that's right. That's where we are. Monsieur Test, then it's a quotation from Monsieur Test, mythical hero of awareness and self-awareness. That name comes from the Latin testis, a witness. Just as Leonardo's anatomical drawings lie behind the truth and evocative power of his great portraits, so the extreme delicacy and precision of Valéry's observation of psychophysiological functioning, and we're talking here about dream, awakening, attention, expectation, discovery, surprise, desire, hope, possession, loss, regret, and so on, underlie his poetic evocations in lyric mode of the shifting, evanescent world of the self. They underlie also the great mysteries of our higher functioning, creativity, knowledge, love, the need for the divine. I love authentic thought, says this lover of the human psyche, accurately observed, as others like the nude human body, that they would draw and redraw for an entire lifetime. Now, from this new perspective, there follows a major change in the idea of poetry and poetic composition. Almost alone within the fellowship of poets, Valéry's sense of value falls henceforth on the making, shaping, language engineering act of the poet's art. The only real thing in art is the art of it, i.e., the crafting of the artifact produced. That puts Paul Valéry distinctly at one end of a spectrum of attitudes and approaches to poetry. The other end would be occupied by the Romantics, for instance, who place highest value on inspiration, authenticity, genius. Or in the ancient world, we might cite the sacred and oracular soothsayers of ancient Greece, suffering the invasive weight of the god within. From his reading of Edgar Allan Poe's The Philosophy of Composition, the youthful Valéry took the dizzying conception of poetry as language engineering and crafted artifice, took it to an extreme. This is poetry seen as an illusion, a magic spell woven at will by a lucidly calculating artist who plays on the sensibility of the reader. This is poetry seen as a form of erotic seduction. To this day, Valéry is sometimes still identified for praise and for blame with this youthful hyperbole or overbid of his. The reality of his actual poetic practice is a good deal more complex. Certainly, the heroic emphasis on the fabricating technical aspect of poetry survives up to and beyond charm, and it's foregrounded, of course, in his theoretical pronouncements in the public sphere about how poetry functions. Yet from this starting point in extreme formalism, the mature Valéry came progressively to integrate the intuitive and non-rational springs of poetic creation. He questioned and he wrestled with what he called the mystery of human sensibility, our power of feeling. Confounding mystery, always one step ahead of his analytical grasp of it. In 1922, he speaks of the need for poetic utterance as a fundamental given of that sensibility. We don't have a higher language, he points out. We don't have a language of the gods with which to express our deepest places. And I quote, "For want of it, man has created those approximations, tears, smiling, sighing, expressive glancing, the kiss, the embrace, the lighting up of a face, spontaneous song, dance, and the very act of love." The highest poetry attempts to stammer these things. In other words, it's an attempt at a healing, liberating speech act. It deals with whatever in human experience is too close, too deep, or too much for ordinary language. It answers the deficit of our would-be divine self-apprehension and mastery of life. Understood in its ultimate tendency, poetry, and I quote, is after all just an attempt at communion, in which respect it is said to resemble the most intimate impulse of the highest love. The latter declaration, coming from his own last days, is a pretty long way from his starting point with Edgar Allan Poe, wouldn't you say? So then, how did system-led Monsieur Test get back to actually writing poetry? Well, in 1912, his publisher Gallimard wanted to republish his youthful poems of the 1880s and early 90s. Valéry agreed to revise them and to add a farewell piece of some 40 lines. The projected farewell grew over a 5-year stretch of compositional labour into La Jeune Parc. The young fate, by the way, young because he speaks for us moderns rather than the 3 elderly crones of Greek mythology, right? Publicly, Valéry spoke of an exercise, deliberate, repeated, and much worked over, enabling him to better observe the mechanisms of creative thought. He spoke too of edifying a monument to a language and culture menaced by the violent upheaval of the Great War. In fact, we know from the author manuscripts of this poem, nearly 900 pages of them, that a much more intimate, intentional process was at work. The return of the repressed poetic voice, orphically laden with the oldest and deepest psychic tensions, those left unresolved, indeed exacerbated by his 20-year silence, the time of his intervening adventure of pure thought. The self-listening, self-discerning poet of 1912-1913 is alerted by strange harmonics of tenderness, idealism, horror. This voice so husky, stroke rough, and veiled in love, stroke horror. As in a mirror, an acoustic mirror, he apprehends the drama of inner division and struggle, of which for 20 years, all unknowing, he has been the theatre. And discerning late in time his own innermost spiritual drama, he stands bereft, dangerously naked. And we read, and I could find no other voice to answer me. The other voice to answer me will, of course, be a new poetic utterance, the poetic utterance demanded by this self-decipherment of a drama played out in time, that of the mystérieuse moi, who speaks in the new poem. The poem is a monologue of the psyche, a specifically modern version of what the universal practice of the 19th century and previous centuries had called the soul, now reduced to a speaking subject without knowledge of the absolute, self-aware, cosmically isolated and lonely. Qui pleure là, sinon le vent simple à cette heure, seul, avec diamants extrêmes? Who weeps there but simply the wind at this hour, a lonely you with extreme diamonds? The original Awakened, she follows Parker-like the thread of memory leading to the original trauma. She's been bitten by the serpent, infused with a feverishly delicious poison of desire. Then comes the evocation of the lost paradise of being, and then the intervening struggle to replace the lost absolute, driving ever deeper the sword of inner division. Her disarray grows to a point of paroxysm where suicide seems the only issue. Then comes a break. We learn that the young fate has known the release of tears. She has then subsided into sleep. And that nervous release brings a new beginning. With the dawn, she's reborn into the age-old cycle of the world. The crescendo of her will to live is affirmed in phase with the crescendo of light growing towards midday. It is unchecked by her fervent reminiscence of the night and her mystic temptation to fuse her identity in the absolute, at the end of which she understands the wisdom of the body that has led her back, Parker-like, to the sunlit world and her incarnate destiny. With a prayer to the sun, the luminous beloved of her lost Eden, she runs to the sea in rediscovered erotic delight at existing. Wow. Valéry claimed fairly to have made poetry out of the living being, sensations, moods, body rhythms, psychic tensions of memory and anticipation, and the fundamental music of our being in the world. He said, at the cost of incredible efforts, expressed cette modulation d'une vie, this modulation of a human life. Modulation, that's music talk, isn't it? Yes, it's the art of key change, matching mood change. That's opera. At least it's a poetry remembering the airy motif, the tender arias of Gluck, and the fuller, powerful orchestrations of Wagner. But it's architectural too. The shape of the poem can be expressed in terms of its fundamental symbolic values. O for ombre, darkness, night, and L for lumière. And so we have the formula O parenthesis L O, and symmetrical reverse L parenthesis O L. And that pattern will continue. So that structural patterning expresses symbolically what Montaigne would have called la forme entière de l'humaine condition, the entire or total form, overall form of the human condition. That's compositional algebra, you see, matching the diamond-like density of poetic expression. And what about charm? Well, charm is everything that wouldn't quite fit in to the compositional pattern of the masterwork. It has the same themes, the same Orphic wisdom, the same moments of the living being are spelled out, the whole alphabet, so to speak, of our human experience in time, but treated now in individual moments, and now with dazzling ease and perfected technical virtuosity. On a ôté les bottes plombées et l'on danse. The leaden boots have come off and we're dancing. Right, I'll stop there, hoping that you'll want to dance a bit too. We've prepared a few examples that we could analyze together if you have a taste for it, and you may be interested in some of the scientific and Leonardo type references. Perhaps we've learned a little bit about poetry too, and where Valéry is coming from in regard to it. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This is very, very comprehensive. You want to read some of this just to give us an idea of the modulation of the music that you were talking about?
Yes, I mean, it is Valéry called poetry an art of language, which it obviously is, but that's not a fact that's evident to everybody. And so it is obviously difficult if you do not know the natural language, which is the background, the matrix of the expression. Apart from that, obviously, traditional French poetry is very precise. You know, it has a syllable count line, it has set forms for the stanzas, it has rhymes which are either masculine or feminine. And these are entirely invisible, of course, to somebody who doesn't speak French language and hasn't heard a lot of French poetry. So it's not easy, therefore, either to enter into Valéry's poetry if you don't have French. But I have translated here, and I think we can get a fairly good idea. Is it something you want to do straight away, Pierrot, this?
You read the French and people can read the English in parallel. So,
Okay. Ni vu ni connu, je suis le parfum vivant et défunt dans le vent venu. Ni vu ni connu, hasard ou génie, à peine venu, la tâche est finie. Ni lu ni compris, ô meilleurs esprits, que d'erreurs promises. Ni vu ni connu le temps d'un sein nu entre deux chemises. Right, so
yeah, no, very
does
good.
does that give you something of the dancing, teasing presence of the sylph? What is the sylph? It's a sort of woodland sprite, minor tutelary deity in Greek mythology.
Right.
But here it's a kind of synonym for the unseizable. And that unseizable is not specified. It's just its reality is embodied in the sound and the rhythms which we're given in French. Actually, ni vu ni connu is a set expression someone you can't get hold of, or who's or not there when he's needed. Ni vu ni connu. It's a popular expression which is used everywhere. And here you've got, and this is not typical of the sonnet form. This is normally a sonnet. It's 14 lines, 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 3. It's not actually even a regular sonnet. It's disconcerting, like the sylph itself, whatever that is, because it's got a refrain, as popular songs have got a refrain, or many folk songs have got a refrain, a round song, and there's variations in the form of that song as well. What you can relate to, I suppose, is the gender almost of it. You've got some clues, haven't you, that would come over quite well at the end. Never seen, still unknown. I've taken the liberty of slightly changing that, but it does change as it goes through the poem. Still unknown, a bare breast glimpse between two shirts. That's erotic, isn't it? That's a sort of teasing, cheeky, erotic glimpse, because the sylph has come towards us and has materialized in sound. That lovely Je suis le parfum vivant et défunt dans le vent venu. I am the perfume living and gone with the wafting wind. It's slender, it's dancing, it's beautiful, and you can't get hold of it. It looks as though you might be able to. For instance, what about Ni vu ni connu, hasard ou génie, à peine venu, la tâche est finie, neither seen nor heard, genius or chance, hardly here, that's it, job done. That's the trouvaille, that's the nugget of gold that the creator finds coming to him after a night's sleep, and suddenly resolves all the problems that he's got. Or the scientist discovering a new formula, suddenly seeing that you can look at this law the other way, or that it can be transposed onto another level, or in a different dimension it can be accepted. Novelty, invention is often unknown. It looks like random chance. You can put it down to either chance or to genius, either in the artist or the scientist. La tâche est finie, but it's signaled by its efficacy. It completes the task that you want to do, and it does so without effort, and you didn't know it was there. Or what about the next stanza? Ni lu ni compris aux meilleurs esprits que d'erreurs promises. That, it looks almost as if the sylph has taken a definite form there, because really we're talking about a work of art there, a poem, let's say. Ni lu ni compris. Have you not read it? You certainly didn't grasp it or seize it with the intelligence. Aux meilleurs esprits que d'erreurs promises. For the best minds, what wanderings in store. The word erreur is, of course, means mistake. They're going to make mistakes of interpretation about my poetry, says poet Paul Valéry, reputedly obscure. But in French, the word erreur has another sense. It's not simply mistakes of interpretation, but it is wanderings, it's errances, errance. In French, you talk about les erreurs d'Ulysse, the wanderings of Ulysses. You see, the exegetes of Valéry's obscure poetry are going to launch themselves into vast exploratory journeys going around the whole globe, and still missing the interest and the point and the enjoyment of his poetry. But it looks there as if we pin down the sylph. It looks as if it's the unknown or the unseizable in poetic creation. But then, just as we thought we got hold of her, ni vu ni connu, le temps d'un sein nu entre deux chemises, it's a teasing glimpse of erotic attraction and charm. And obviously, it's so slight that it teases and gives no satisfaction. So in the end, what is the sylph? It is that quantum of randomness in the life of the poem, in the life of the artist or the scientist, or in life tout court, life itself as such. And what Valéry has done, and the achievement of this little poem, tiny poem, operating with very small means, is to embody that meaning in sound, in musical sound. So form is significant. So form always signifies in Valéry. That's why he's a very interesting poet technically, as well as a very interesting poet in relation to the creative mind and its various applications.
Yeah, so let me say a few words from my perspective, somebody who didn't study literature
Mm.
other than a hobby. So I consider Paul Valéry one of the greatest poets I've read in my life, and I think I've read a lot of poetry, especially the long poems. um, Beyond the poetry, probably mm, getting into philosophy. The the biography of this poet, though, sounds a little different from others. So I've been trying to think why he sounds so different. Is it possible that it comes from his biography? He was not born in Paris, right? He moved to Paris later in life, so he
Yes, that's
was
right. He was born, he's a Mediterranean Frenchman. He comes from
right.
the town of Sète on the between Montpellier and Marseille. It's on
Right.
the
So let's say provincial France, not
Provençal,
Paris,
yes.
not the
Yes.
Paris or Montmartre
No, 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 no. No, he's a
exactly.
Mediterranean. That's extremely important for some of his most important. I'm sure you have in mind one of the greatest poems of Charme, one of the long poems. I agree with you that all these long poems are magnificent. If I haven't put them forward, it's just that we ain't got much time, and they're really really tough to grapple with and get the substantial nourishment out of them. But you're thinking, I'm sure, of Le Cimetière Marin. Do you have a translation by any chance of that, of the first stanza of that poem?
Did I put it here? I don't think so.
You haven't one? No.
No, sorry. Did I? No. Sorry,
Well,
I don't have it here. No,
can I find that? I'm not sure. I have a
that's okay.
French version somewhere.
Let me let let me finish my question though.
Yes,
Because
sure.
okay, so the birthplace is already kind of unusual for the intellectual of the time. Then he moves to Paris, but he has very humble jobs, right? It's not like a journalist he has a very humble job.
Yes, well, he worked as a clerk at the Ministry of War, which was quite a they used to call, well, you in America have just reverted to the Ministry of War. But the French had it, of course, at the end of the century. And he was a clerk, a humble clerk.
Mm.
But he was already very well connected with the circles of Mallarmé. He knew André Gide. He was actually hired, you know, this by Cecil Rhodes's chartered company, which was busy at that time carving out an empire, British Empire, in East Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, places like that.
Right.
And he did a translation job for, and he has this extraordinary letter to Gide, which says, you wouldn't believe this cold, calculating power play that's going on in Africa at this time. So he was well connected, and uh, the fact that he was in the Ministry of War was a problem to him because you remember that was the time of the affaire Dreyfus,
Mm.
simply after the Franco-Prussian War, and by the 90s. France was divided into two camps, for and against Dreyfus. And he was on the wrong side of that debate, I'm afraid
I
to tell
see.
you.
Anyway,
Um,
it's a strange biography for a great poet, and then he doesn't become really a professional writer until what, his 40s, his 50s?
yes, yes, he he did a clerk's job for 20 years while he was doing his own original thing, which was founding his system of thought, his inner science, which he confided to the cahiers, his notebooks, and they have their own mythology about them. We could look at some of the pictures if you've got them on
Yes,
the
we
PowerPoint.
we 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 are getting there precisely. So he doesn't become a real writer, a professional writer until later. But in the meantime, he's writing how many? 250 notebooks? How many pages? Thousands of pages?
Oh, 26,600 pages.
Six and
26,000. They're 29 volumes, nearly 1,000 pages each of the cahier. And
and
actually,
there's
there,
diagrams, there's
yes,
formulas, and of course there's
that's right.
text.
Well, this is the opening of the first volume, Journal de bord. It's a navigational term borrowed from English, logbook. It's a captain's logbook of a ship which sets out on a long exploratory trip, and he has the sensation that he's going to do that. These cahiers were only produced in 1,000 copies in facsimile. So they were photocopies of actual notebooks in which he wrote. But he used to get up about 4:30 in the morning. As he says, he worked between la lampe, entre la lampe et le soleil, between the lamp of his study, the light, and the sun rising. But he used to go on until the postman came. And later, after the First World War, really, when he was very famous, bringing him what he called un courrier de ministre, a minister's post bag, which he then had to deal with and reply. But you see, what he did was to take little bits of his cahier and think them and present them for the public. And he did a huge amount of essay writing, talks, conferences around Europe. He was in the that after the First World War, the League of Nations put together a committee for intellectual collaboration, and it took all the top heads of European culture, science, and arts and put them together in what it hoped was an internationalist and pacifist spirit. Really, after his essay La crise de l'esprit, which is one of the great documents about the crisis in European civilization, begins Nous autres civilisations, nous savons maintenant que nous sommes mortels. We civilizations now know that we are mortal. It's a bit like the enterrement de Dieu, isn't it? The mortality of man appears in Valéry's youth, and of course in his maturity. It's the Great War, which seems to threaten all the worthwhile and life-affirming humanistic enterprises of the human spirit. And he lives through that crisis. And what he does is sell his thoughts, in small change for the public. But he's not really interested in any of that. All those writings which make up his public reputation are undermined by his real work, his laboratory, his morning laboratory of pure thought. And here you have a sort of implicit recognition of the influence of Leonardo da Vinci. You get the picture here is an androgynous young beautiful person, male, female, we're not sure, probably looking at themselves in a mirror. This is a Narcissus theme. You get a tree there. You see some algebraic calculations, some notes of scientists' names. And what's going on here on the opposite page is he's talking about the field of attention to his own consciousness. He's scanning his own consciousness, which contains a number of these things, heterogeneous objects, and it changes in time. And if you look at the bottom there, you'll see, first of all, an attempt to geometrize the variation in time of a human consciousness, and then some algebraic notation, the attempt to mathematize and the thermodynamics of that process. You can see that he's trying to marry psychology to models borrowed from other sciences, thermodynamics, for instance.
It's fascinating. So what was this fascination with Leonardo's method? He wrote, when did he write he was still young when he wrote the first essay on
Yeah,
Leonardo, right?
that's right. Yes, I described Leonardo as a founding inspiration, and he was. In 1894, he wrote L'Introduction à la méthode de Léonard de Vinci, Introduction to the Method of Leonardo da Vinci. It isn't his best piece of writing precisely because he's at the beginning of this adventure. He hasn't got his models, he hasn't got um, he can't represent the continuity of and the variation of human consciousness very well. The scientific models are not yet very well integrated or exploited. It's not the most transparent of his texts, but what he saw in Leonardo was certainly a universal mind, a mind that was curious about everything, about the tourbillon, the whirlpool of water, the streams of water, how they came together, bubbled up, filed off, joined, disjoined, and so on. He's amazingly interested in things like that. Or the naked human body, you see, that he compares to psyche, the mind. And of course, it's connected to the body and mind are connected. But he talked about the human subject as CEM, corps, esprit, monde. It's a body-mind continuum that is penetrated by and contains, in understanding, in response, the world, monde. The signature that you saw on that first page of the first cahier was that of Louis de Broglie, the Nobel Prize winner, quantum physics. I don't know whether you can see that there, but he's the one who launched this unknown Valéry onto the public way after his state funeral. I mean, Valéry was dead by the time his real oeuvre, his laboratory work on mental functioning, on creativity, came out. It came out between 1957 and 1961. But I don't know of another case of an apparent littérateur, somebody who was known for his writing, literary writing, who really had another.
Oh, we lost your audio.
For secret life, which was much more important and more important to him.
In this,
All right.
in this,
Your internet connection is unstable.
yeah, it's a little unstable, but we're okay. Did he have any temptation to become a painter? Some of the notebooks have this more
Oh yes,
sophisticated
I mean,
images.
some of them are absolutely fascinating. You can see there over to the right, you can see a picture of his hand holding a cigarette. I'm afraid he was an inveterate smoker. Coffee and cigarettes, classic French intellectual. And just as Leonardo does complex anatomical drawings, he's got a very fine study of his hand holding the cigarette. You see, it's rugged, it's solid, it's immobile, and yet it's made up of tensions, which he's tried to represent and tried to understand. So one of the points about drawing things concretely is it enables you to see them more intensely and to see what's behind them, to think about what's behind them. But he's always interested in creativity. You see, Leonardo is an example of human creativity. And it's a remarkable fact that often enough, there are psychologies of human creativity. That is a human science now. But strangely enough, it's rare to get scientists talking to artists in this field. And yet, I mean, if I think back to my studies of French literature, that's been my professional preoccupation. What you see is that there's a rich inheritance deposit of reflections on creativity, artistic creativity, so that scientists and artists should talk to each other more often. And what Valéry would say is, and I think he would be endorsed by Leonardo entirely in this, is that many of the attributes of creative thought are childlike. He says at one point that the child doesn't know and sees, whereas his father knows and doesn't see. And that's a beautiful compressed formula for saying that the child is learning all the time. The child is not yet programmed by preset ways of seeing. And of course, you know, all of us accumulate a wisdom, a sort of classification, an evaluative system that we carry with us and determines our seeing. But a child doesn't have that. A child is free to explore and experiment and vary. And I think that's one of the things that the creative mind in whatever discipline always does. So
you have a question from the audience, from Bob. Is Monsieur Test Valéry himself, or is Monsieur Test what Valéry wanted to be?
Really? Well, a bit of each. In my judgment, more of a myth that was not him. But that's amazing. Yes. So Leonardo's drawings, and
Yeah,
look how accurate, how well observed, how odd. Look, the bending thumb there, or the thumb that almost reaches backwards there. Leonardo's are more feminine hands, aren't they? Look at that one. We recognize that, don't we, on one of his paintings or statues? Can't remember which. There's a Leonardo that has that upward pointing finger. And look at all the things that those hands are doing. There's one saying no, refusing, and there's one, I think, pointing to something or emphasizing something, and hands offering or receiving. And the same thing with Valéry, though I don't see his cigarette there. Thank you for putting that up. That's very, see, that's the precision, but also the variation and what's behind the variation. As I say, there's one hand is refusing, one hand is accepting or offering. Of somebody like Leonardo moves between fields which are often distinct, and he does this by the mediation of accurate observation.
should we go back to Monsieur Test?
Yes, Monsieur Test. Oh, Monsieur Test is a myth, really. There were several short. There's La Soirée avec Monsieur Test. He's a kind of monster who's partly a pose detective Dupin, and there are various basic terms the choice that Valéry has made of silence, self-attention, construction of models that will enable him to understand mind-body functioning, and will eventually enhance his power of creation. I mean, most of the things that I quoted could have, and some did, actually come out of writings about Monsieur Test. He was a sort of figurehead, hero of the intellect, who sacrificed fame and actual concrete creation, trying to please a public, you see. As soon as you get into writing poetry, you have to consider what the public will like and what will enable you to earn a living. Whereas this is pure thought, abstracted from those circumstantial and contingent considerations, and pursued for its own sake in silence, without any kind of communication or support or reward, other than, as one of the poems of Charme says, he compares himself to a rower rowing back towards the source of the river against the current. The current is obviously spontaneity, life. Observing that current and seeing its whirlpools and its cascades, and that's something else.
Very good. I think in 1 hour we covered quite a bit of ground. We discussed the poetry and the notebooks. Monsieur Test, Valéry, definitely a very complex mind. As you said, a mind that believed in the importance of creativity. Lots of food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.